Hey everybody, it's composer Brian Ralston here. The last video was really going through steps of marking your cues from a spotting session and in and out points and how to break those off into their own cues within Digital Performer, their own project files. This video I want to actually go through one particular cue and add our marker notes from the same spotting sessions and show you how to determine meter and tempo and hit points, which is kind of a separate process here. So I brought up this file. This is the same reel we were dealing with before. This is Q5M3, as you can see up here. And we're going to go in here, and here's my markers. And I'm going to go to some time code points that from my meeting that shows where certain hit points are to happen. And this is from either me or music editor has taken these, or both of us. And so this marker here at 3:45:00 on the frames. We had talked about wanting a beat to start. So I'm going to leave that there. And then my next note says at 54 seconds, the police begin the raid. There's a drum fill for about a measure before the police begin the raid. Okay, so I'm going to add a mark there. Drum fill, police begin raid. Let's see about that. Okay, it's a little off from that. Again, the spotting session is, as you in that meeting, things are going so quickly. But okay, so let's keep going. 3:57:0. Bass guitar. We talked about doing a melody in the bass. I'm going to add a marker. Say bass melody in. Okay. And 4:09:00. 4:09:00. He lights a match, and he's going to set a lot of this stuff on fire. So this was kind of a hit point. We wanted to show the money, and it's part of his plan of getting away with this robbery here. So lights match, okay. And just going to keep going down my notes. At 4:21, they start talking. And another thing that you want to make sure in hit point is if they're going to talk or there's going to be some key point that you don't want to miss in the dialogue, just kind of get out of the way of the dialogue. So down for dialogue. Okay. So at 4:33, have a hit point here about using the orchestra, full orchestra, maybe some low strings. This is my notes now, and trombones. Okay. And just a few more. 4:57, talked about high string, kind of adding intensity as the police are storming. Police storm bank, high string, intensity. These are literally just taking my notes from the session and just kind of adding them into what we're doing. At 5 minutes and 1 frame, we talked about wanting to have some string risers building to this tension. So string risers, and 2 more. 5:4:13. It goes into slow motion here, and usually when there's a big camera move or some other change, especially slow motion, it's definitely some sort of a hit point that you're going to want to acknowledge musically. Okay, and then at 5:19.3, the cue is out. Okay. And that's roughly what I had before when we had talked about the cue being out. So, okay, fine. So we'll just leave it the way I had before. Out points, whether decays or anything, happen exactly. Sometimes they have to happen visually to something, but sometimes they can decay over a frame or two, and that's fine. Okay. So I'm going to save this. So now I want to begin figuring out how I'm going. I have these markers here, if you can see. And it gives me kind of a good roadmap as to what I have to write, but nothing lines up with any measure. Things are kind of in the middle of measures, and I need to figure out what tempo of music's in my head, what I'm thinking, and how I'm going to hit these. So the great thing in Digital Performer is the ability to use these markers to find tempos. And you can assign an importance or a weight to these markers. They've all defaulted to being normal. You see over here on the right. So I can give them very important, normal, or least important determinations when I'm finding a tempo. So let's say the start point is very important. So that point is measure 1. And the other thing I'm going to tell you now is you will save yourself a lot of headache if you figure out these markers and you figure out these tempos for your cue before you add any 0 or negative measures before measure 1. If you can do that before you do that, you're going to save yourself a lot of headache in trying to get things to line up later. So this beat start was a pretty important marker. The bass melody was very important. The drum fill, raid begin, okay, very important. Let's see, the lighting of the match was very important. Down for dialogue, okay, full orchestra, normal. Does that have to be an exact frame? Maybe not, maybe, okay. Police, normal. The string risers were important. Slow motion is very important. And the out is, okay, least important. So you can basically tell Digital Performer what you want to hit and how you want to hit it, okay? Make sure before you, in order for you to find tempo for these locked markers, they actually have to be locked, so lock all these markers. I'm not going to deal with the stuff down here because it's 5M4, 5M5. These are markers for later cues that I don't really care about. This is just the beginning of this 5M3 cue. And I'm going to click Find down to the cues in 5M3 that I wanted to find a tempo, okay? So I'm going to go here, find tempo for locked markers. And now here's where you get to add kind of what you're thinking in your head. If I'm thinking of a melody, I'm thinking of something, and if I were to give it a tempo roughly, let's say it's probably in that 75 beats a minute to maybe 85 beats a minute, something in that range, right? I'm going to have it look for tempos that are by quarter beat per minute, right? But it doesn't matter. They're all pretty much the same. So here it's telling me if I were to choose this tempo at 79.75, I'm going to hit almost all of these cues on a beat somewhere. Now, I'm not talking about meters, but I'm talking about just the beats. I'm going to hit almost all of these beats within a frame or two. So some of these frames are off by 2 frames. Some are off by 1 frame. It's telling me which ones are off. The one that's off the most is the out point at 6 frames off. But again, the out point, it's not that important in this particular cue. Sometimes it can be. But so we can then figure out, okay, if I make this cue, everything is going to be a tempo of 79.75. I clicked apply. And now, if I go back to this timeline, everything is pretty much lined up with the beat.
We better hurry.
And I can turn on my metronome, see if I've even set up my metronome properly. This is an old file. So yeah, built in. Okay.
We better hurry.
So there's my metronome, and it basically I know as I start to compose, I have 7 measures here of kind of an intro of sorts until I get to this beat start right here. I measure 7, which is within less than a frame, or it was about a frame, I guess. And so this is how I can line up these cues and determine my tempo. And that's something that only Digital Performer really does and has. I don't know any other DAW that has a tool like this where you can do this. Most of these things are actually lining up on a downbeat, which is great. But I can visually kind of go through here and say, okay, so here's a slow motion thing that is not really on a downbeat. It's kind of ending up on beat 3. Well, what if I don't want that to be on beat 3? What if I want the slow motion? So I have a string riser before at, and I want the slow motion actually start on a downbeat. So now I can actually go in and say, okay, on my conductor track, I want to change the meter of measure 33, and just to the next measure, I'm going to make it a 2/4 measure. Metronome click is going to be on the quarter, change. And so now I've gotten a string riser, I have a 4/4 measure, and then I have a 2/4 measure continuing that string riser, and then right there the slow motion starts on a downbeat. Okay? So now I've got essentially a cue in 4/4 time, but I have 1 2/4 measure at measure 33, and that makes that line up. And then my 5M3 is out here. So that's probably a final note on measure 38 and some sort of a decay going out to there. Does that make sense? So the last thing that you can do, and I suggest and is very helpful, is if you go back to the measure 1, now you can insert measures before measure 1 to give you some space to begin to record. When you're delivering files, recording out stems, delivering files, whatever, it's always good to have a little bit of space or headroom on the front of the file, not exactly on the downbeat where music is to start. For me, it's a good rule of thumb to add about 4 measures to the beginning. It all depends on tempo. If it's a really slow tempo, it might only be 2 measures. But 4 measures is a good point. You're going to maintain all times following the insertion point, which means it's just going to literally insert a measure 0, -1, -2, -3 before this, but your time codes and all these locked markers, everything is going to stay the same. So I click OK, and so now my measure 1 is still measure 1. And here's the dialog file from before that we've copied, because it's really referencing a larger file for the entire QuickTime that was brought in the other video. So I can actually go here and I can just kind of pull that forward if I want to have some reference dialog leading up to the cue.
Yeah, well, I just can't pull a helicopter out of my ass. We need more time.
No time.
And then what I usually do is pretty good rule of thumb for me to kind of start the recording of this 1 measure before. You can set your record in and out points 1 measure before, and so that will make things easier for you when here's an out point. It's usually going to tail out a little bit longer. And then here's my in point, put that at measure 0. And now everything you record, when you set the record, because you're going to punch in right there, you will actually record the same length of audio in all of your stems that you're recording. So that is how I determine meters and tempos. This was pretty easy because everything was pretty much lined up on a downbeat in 4, which makes it really easy. But if you really needed to hit a lot more hit points in here, you wanted to change these meters. This was the only meter we had to change, but we could certainly change things to be 7/8 time, 5/8 time to hit a certain thing on a downbeat if we wanted to. If you have a particular meter in mind that you want to write your cue in, you don't have to start in 4/4 obviously. So if you wanted, before you added these inserted measures beforehand, if you knew you wanted to start your cue in 7/8 time, perhaps when you look for a tempo over here, you might be looking for a tempo, not on the quarter note, but you might be looking for a tempo on the eighth note if you were doing something in 7/8. And then that'll tell you exactly hit points in relation to beats. And in this case, an eighth note beat, but I did it for quarter note beat. So it's a really powerful tool, and it helps me to insert my markers. And of course, I can even further, as I'm going through, add this, but I know that I have this intro here, and I have a little 1 measure fill before the bass comes in here. And then here's a second little 4 measure segment here that I can, as the money is burning, I can develop. And so yeah. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to show you here is a finished cue. So I bring up the finished version of that 5M3. All of the MIDI has been recorded and rendered into audio. For the sake of giving it to a mixer, all the tracks, I've merged all the tracks so that they're all the same length. And you see that here. There's that 1, 2, 4 measure that we had done there. And I go down here, I've recorded out my stems. I usually do 1 stereo full, which I don't have in here yet. And then I have, percussion, wind, string, atmosphere, bass, guitar keys, whatever makes sense, and how you decide you're going to deliver with your sound designer and your post supervisor. So these cues, these stem cues, if they were to be played all together at the same volume, they will match the mixed stereo version of what's going on. And so if you play this, now this is going to be unmixed in terms of dialogue. It's probably going to be a lot more music heavy than it would be in the final film. But here's that version.
All right. Oh, okay. Get her out.
We better hurry.
We come up on a section here where the beat starts. That corresponds to when the police begin storming the bank. And then the strings come in on the match being lit. And you see the music come down again for the happening in dialogue. And the final version, they actually inserted some police talking over this section. So.
Come on.
There's that string riser, the slow motion. And then the out point of the cue. And that's how you do that. And so yeah, so that is putting in markers, determining tempos and meters in Digital Performer. Thanks for watching, and I hope you find it educational. All right.